Now, the Buckeye Extra podcast with Rob Oller, Bill Rabinowitz, and Joey Kaufman from the Columbus Dispatch.
Welcome, listeners, Buckeye listeners, and I'm sure we have some Michigan Wolverine listeners because our special guest for like the third, fourth, 10th, I don't know what consecutive year, is the Matt Stout. Matthew?
Matt.
Well, you're a lawyer. Wait a
Matt.
minute. You're an attorney. I don't say lawyer. You're an attorney, so I will say Matthew Stout. Upper Arlington native?
Yes.
A Golden Bear. He might have been he was a Golden Bear before Jack Nicklaus was a Golden Bear. Let's put it that way.
That's not true.
That's not true. And speaking of that, do you know Jack Nicklaus got his name from the school? The school didn't get its name from Jack Nicklaus. Let's just get that straight.
Jack Nicklaus got his name from the Australian press.
Right, exactly. It just happened. It was coincidental.
Yes.
It was coincidental that it was the Golden Bear. But anyhow, Jack Nicklaus, a big Ohio State fan. So how's that for transitioning here?
To play football at Ohio State.
Yeah.
And Woody Hayes said, son, you belong on a golf course.
That's right. Talk with his dad, maybe.
Yes.
Charlie.
Yeah.
Anyhow, Matt was a wrestler. What weight? I always ask you. Where were you?
18 pounds.
118. Walked on at Michigan, which he loved Michigan, even though he's a Columbus guy. He's one of those kind of guys, listeners. You know what I'm talking about. Likes the rebel. There, who else? What other Columbus guys went?
We got all kinds of them. We got David Key.
Oh yeah, who's I'm drawing a blank on the DB.
Marcus Ray.
Marcus Ray, man, he's legendary.
Yeah.
I remember I wrote a
played basketball.
Who?
Northland, Trey Burke.
Oh yeah.
Player of the year in 2013 with the Northland.
Yeah, absolutely.
Recruited him.
Yeah. So throw Matt in that on that list. He walked on at Michigan. He lettered as a freshman, which is not easy to do as a walk-on. Got his letter jacket, and here we are. Now he's an attorney. You want to shout out your name of your firm, or you want to keep that on the down low?
It's Bricker Graydon, formerly Bricker Eckler, founded in 1945 by John Bricker, who was the former governor of Ohio and a state senator as well, and also ran for a U.S. senator, rather, ran for president, and also cast the deciding vote to hire Woody Hayes. When he was hired in 1951, he was on the Ohio State Board of Trustees, and he cast the deciding vote to hire Woody Hayes.
There you go. I mean, this guy is a font of information, folks. And I wouldn't say he's gloating, but he's had the last 3 years have been 3 good years for the Michigan men. Maybe throw this out there and I'm sure I'll get.
Here we go.
Here comes the Connor Stallions. We won't go there. Connor Stallions is not on the staff. In fact, we're not sure they have any advanced scouting people on the staff. I mean, they're probably so gun shy that let's drop that and not have anybody legally doing it. Which, it's funny. We always say, I know this is sort of like off topic, but we always say they broke the law or it's illegal. It's not a legal thing. It's a rule, right? I mean, this guy isn't going to prison because he, advanced scouted. Anyhow, tell me about Michigan. You still have the aura of, the national champs. You got the natty, but a price was paid because 16, how many starters are gone from that team? Just to set it up.
Yeah, I don't know the exact number.
I think it's 16 starters, including the quarterback, which is the most important position in football, college football, but maybe more even college than the NFL. I don't know. But, he's gone. They lost a lot. They do have a strong defensive line back, very strong defensive line. And those guys are healthy, right, Matt? Tell me what's the strength of Michigan as we look ahead to Saturday's game in the shoe, Ohio State, Michigan. Michigan's won 3 straight. Most people think that this is Ohio State's year. I think it's a 20-point, somewhere around a 20-point spread. But if this game gets into the fourth quarter and it's close, there's going to be some nervous, anxious Ohio State fans because anything can happen then. So tell me about Michigan. What's the strength of this team and what's the weakness?
Well, I mean, they're 6-5, as you know.
Yep.
I think going into this year, realistic fans saw them being 8-4 probably, with losses at home to Texas and Oregon, a loss to Ohio State, and then probably a loss. I thought maybe a loss at Washington, just because Washington is a tough place to play. But they didn't, and you know what? They lost to Texas at home. They lost to Oregon at home. They lost to Washington on the road. The two losses maybe you didn't see coming were the one at Illinois, who's 8-3, where they didn't play particularly well. They lost 21-7 when they were dealing with some quarterback issues, which they continue to deal with. And then nobody expected Indiana to be 10-1, right? And they lost to a good Indiana team, 20-15 in Bloomington. Historically, Michigan has struggled the last 10 years in Bloomington. I mean, they've won twice in overtime there with good teams. They lost there in 2020, although I'm not sure that season is really, is relevant. But the strength of Michigan is their interior line and their defensive line in general. They've got Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant in the interior line. Mason Graham is going to be a first-team All-American, probably a top 10 draft pick or top 15 draft pick out of California, state wrestling champion, which is significant. All defensive linemen should wrestle. If anybody from Upper Arlington High School on the football team is listening to this, you should wrestle if you play defensive line. But Kenneth Grant also, definitely first-team All-Big Ten. And then Josiah Stewart on the edge is graded out very well this year. You also have Derek Moore on the edge. Now, all those guys have had some injuries at some point in time, but they all appear to be fully healthy. So if Michigan's going to have any chance of winning this game, the reason they won it the last 3 years is they've controlled the line of scrimmage. They especially controlled it in 2021. They controlled it at the end of the game in 2022 when they ripped off, 2 long runs. And they controlled it at the end of the game last year when they got the ball back with 7 minutes to go on a 3-point lead. And they just ran the ball down Ohio State's throat, right, and milked the clock to where Ohio State didn't have enough time left to do anything and got a field goal. So that is their strength. Their weakness is on the offensive side of the ball, they have just not clicked at all. They lost J.J. McCarthy, and the quarterback situation has been a disaster. Originally, I think they thought Jack Tuttle was going to be their starter. He's a seventh-year senior from Indiana. He got hurt in the spring. Everybody then thought it was going to be Alex Orji, who was just a freak athlete, but apparently can't throw the ball. So then all of a sudden it was, Davis Warren, who emerged as the starter the first 3 games. He threw a bunch of picks against Arkansas State. The coaching staff, made a decision to pull him. I think that was a mistake because they lost a lot of development there. He has played better in the last couple of weeks, because they put Alex Orji in. He was actually 2-1, but he couldn't throw the ball. They put Tuttle in. Tuttle, looked okay against Washington, but couldn't close the game and made a lot of mistakes down the stretch. He then got concussed and, retired from football. So then they went back to Davis Warren. And Davis Warren has looked serviceable, but on top of the quarterback, the offensive line has been redone, and it just has not blocked very well, especially in pass protection. They don't seem to have any game breakers on the offensive side of the ball at the wide receiver position. They are last in the Big Ten in passes completed over 40 yards. They're second to last in the Big Ten in passes completed over 30 yards. And they have not thrown a ball over 40 yards all year. Their best players on offense, Colston Loveland, a tight end who's an All-American. He'll be gone after this year, but he's also dinged up. He didn't play the second half this past week against Northwestern. Glenn Mullings is their lead tailback along with Donovan Edwards. I don't coach football. I'm not at practice every day. When I have a team, my first team meeting of the year as a wrestling coach, I tell the parents, I'm at practice every day. I have a pretty good idea who the best guys are. But the fan base is perplexed as to why they can't put Khalil Mullings and Donovan Edwards on the field at the same time. Especially since your wide receivers can't seem to get separation. And Donovan Edwards is a Marshall Faulk type player, and that he can catch the football and get separation and make big time plays. So why not put your best back, who is Khalil Mullings, on the field and put Donovan Edwards on the field too, as split out and see what you can do. So really their problem has been offense until last week against Northwestern. They scored 50 points. That's the first time they had scored more than 30 points since the first game of the year.
That, by the way, that has Ohio State fans nervous. I think it was pretty smooth sailing because you heard that Michigan's offense was not quite as bad as Iowa's last year, but just didn't have a lot going for it. It had some talent, but just hadn't put it together. So you score 50, especially a week after Ohio State had only scored 30, against them. So it's like, okay, what's going on here? Now, I think that even with all that, I think they were still under 200 yards passing, which is
195 yards passing.
Yeah, which is hard to do seemingly with, but it's, man, I think I picked it like a, what was the score? Something like a 30-17 game or something like that. Maybe 33-17. I don't know. I do think that one stat to keep an eye on is I believe 10 of the last 11 games, the team that had more rushing yards won. That, there's an anomaly in there, the one. I don't know what the one is. At some point, that's got to change. And I would think for Saturday's game, Ohio State's run game has not been great. They've had a couple good games. They've got this makeshift line. They lost Seth McLaughlin that was a huge loss. They lost Simmons earlier, left tackle against Oregon. They lost McLaughlin to an Achilles injury. They've had to mix and match. That's part of it. I think their backs are pretty good. Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins. I don't know if they're great, but they're pretty good. They'll get the job done. But Michigan's strength is, against the run. So a couple of things I can just speak sort of the angst in Ohio State Buckeye Nation, which is always pretty high, honestly, as you probably know, is that, the Donovan Edwards he's the guy, man, because what he's done against Ohio State, it's almost like you don't even want to say his name. Ohio State fans don't even want to say his name. Oh, he's not that good. Well, he's not that good. Then he rips off these huge chunk plays against Ohio State. I'm not sure that the Michigan line is what it's been, but the guy's dangerous. And so, if it's close at halftime, third quarter, anything can happen. This is one of probably the lesser Michigan teams of the last, decade? I don't know. You tell me.
Team. I mean, obviously 2020 was a bad team. They went 2-2.
Well, right. Yeah.
But it's the worst team in the last decade statistically.
Right.
You have to go back to the Brady Hoke era 2014 when they finished the season 5-7 to have a team this bad. Other than that, you've got a couple of an 8-5 or a 9-4 team in there in 2017. That was not a good team that didn't have a quarterback. It's interesting because in 2022, Jim Knowles basically put everybody in the box and played cover zero to stop the run, right? And Michigan burned him. McCarthy burned him with a 75-yard touchdown pass. He burned him with a 69-yard touchdown pass. He burned him with a 41-yard touchdown pass, right? But that Jim Knowles is probably going to be able to play that same game plan this year and not have to worry about it because Michigan has no vertical passing attack up to this point. And I think that's where that's where it really gets dicey for Michigan, or it doesn't get dicey. They can't beat Ohio State without going over the top, and right now they can't do that, right? So
you mentioned something, Brady Hoke, brings me to another question. Sherrone Moore, what's up in Ann Arbor? What's the vibe on the job he's done? Is he the answer? Jim Harbaugh struggled early and was, I don't know if he was ever on thin ice. I think maybe he was, maybe he wasn't, but it took him time to finally get his recruiting up to snuff and get the assistant coaches he needed, and at the end it was like, we love Jim Harbaugh, or at least we love what Jim Harbaugh brings to the table, a national title. What about Moore? It was one of those things where, he took over, he did well, and so let's give him a shot. Is he the long-term answer? I mean, what do you think?
I think it's too early to tell. I think he was put in a difficult situation. I mean, he was the person to take the job because when you make it to the national title game, your season doesn't end until January 10th, right? well, everybody in the portal had, a lot of people had already made their decisions in the portal. It was hard to, and then Harbaugh stuck around after that for how long did it take him to actually commit to the Chargers? I mean, that was another at least week. So it was I think it was a difficult situation for him. You mentioned all the guys that graduated. He was the logical choice because he could keep the guys that were coming back there.
Right.
If he leaves, then everybody, Mason Graham, Will Johnson, all these guys, Mason Graham was getting offered supposedly $1 million to go play at Oregon, right? So these guys leave. I think if you look at Washington, they were in the national title game last year. They lost their coach. They're 6-5.
Right.
Alabama was in the Final Four last year. They lost their coach. They're 8-3. That's not good by Alabama standards, and they got Washington's coach. So I think he's in a tough spot, right? And then he had to hire his coordinators late. He settled on Kirk Campbell, the quarterback's coach, who I think that person is probably most under fire in Ann Arbor because the offensive play calling and the fact that the offense has been so bad. You point that to the offensive coordinator. His only gig prior to this of significance was he was the offensive coordinator in Old Dominion and he got fired. Okay, so and then he hired Wink Martindale as the defensive coordinator because he wanted to get somebody out of the John Harbaugh, Jesse Minter, Mike McDonald, Baltimore Ravens amoeba type defense, which was brought in to deal with Ohio State and their big plays, right? They brought this defense in to make Ohio State drive the field and basically shorten the game against them to a point where you could compete with their athletes. So Wink Martindale was the creator of this, but he was also a washout in the NFL. He got fired by the Giants, right? So he definitely struggled the first half of the year. I think his defense has played better the second half of the year. There's been definite improvement there, probably because he realized finally I'm not playing with an NFL defense. I don't have NFL athletes. I've got college kids. I don't know that they're student athletes anymore because they're getting paid so much. But the point is, I think the defense has adapted a little bit and looked better down the stretch. I mean, they played Oregon decently in Ann Arbor. Granted, it was in Ann Arbor. Obviously, they only gave up 50 or 20 points to Indiana on the road in Bloomington. Northwestern's offense is horrible, so that doesn't matter. But I think, it's a tough situation because he had to hire, and the whole defensive staff turned over. And his defensive coordinator is now the coordinator of the Chargers, and they have one of the top defenses in the NFL statistically. Going into last night, they did. I don't know after last night if they still do. But the fact of the matter is, he was a pretty good coordinator. And he took all of his, most of his assistants with him. So basically, he had to rebuild the entire defensive staff. The offensive staff, he lost Mike Hart on top of all the other stuff, who I think was a really good coach. Nobody really knows why he left. So I think it's just a tough situation with the timing, the turnover of staff, the loss of players, being a first-year coach, coming off of a national title where, let's face it, and a stretch where your school went 40-3, right? You're not going to be able to do anything right. I go back to what I said. I saw this as an 8-4 season, and there's been some surprises in the schedule. Indiana was a surprise. Illinois is 8-3. You had to go to Illinois to play them. Just hasn't, it hasn't. There's been some tough games on that schedule. So
right. So you said $1 million to go to Oregon. That's chump change now.
Yeah, right.
Matt, they just got a $12 million quarterback. If those reports are true.
If it's true, right? If it's true, but really, we're paying $12 million for somebody who's never thrown a pass in college.
I know, it's just crazy. It's crazy.
And did you hear the story? Supposedly, how that all happened? How they got the $12 million?
No.
Mary Ellison, the founder of Oracle, is married to a Michigan grad, and she doesn't want to see Michigan lose. And she basically told him, "You need to go get this guy and offer him a bunch of money." Is what the story is. Who knows if that's true or not?
Wow.
But
yeah,
he went to Illinois, but didn't graduate.
Whoa.
And his new wife, who nobody knew about, went to Michigan.
Nobody knew about. I love it.
Yeah,
it's hilarious. All right, so how does Michigan win this game? Like, what path do you see? How does it have to go? Now, granted, weird things can happen, special teams, block punts, that type of thing. Although I will say that I think the one thing Ohio State has going for it, I think it's pretty solid in all three phases now. offense, defense, and special teams. This Caleb Downs kid from Alabama is spectacular. But how does Michigan win this game?
Well, I think, first of all, college football games are decided by a handful of plays in most cases in games like this. And I think that was no more evident than it was in the Ohio State-Indiana game. It was a 7-7 game. Indiana fumbles that punt exchange, gives Ohio State the ball on the 6-yard line. They score, and then Downs returns a punt for a touchdown, and going from 7-0 Indiana to 7-7 to all of a sudden it's 21-7. You're on the road at Ohio Stadium, and it's a totally different game. 2 plays.
Right.
Changed the whole tenor of that game. So I do think, games are decided by a handful of plays. You can look at last year's Ohio State-Michigan game. Will Johnson jumps the route and gets that interception that sets Michigan up at the 6-yard line. And ultimately, that's the difference in the game, right? The rest of the game's an even game.
Right.
So I would say they win the game the way they've won it the last 3 years. They got to control the line of scrimmage, both on the offensive and defensive side of the ball. I think that's more likely to happen on the defensive side of the ball. I think the offensive side of the ball, like I said, their line is not blocked well, and Ohio State's got some really good players on the defensive line. And they got to get turnovers. They got to force some turnovers because that neutralizes the 20-point disadvantage that the odds makers think they have. So they got to get turnovers and they got to stay in the game, right? Which is 2 years ago we talked about that. Ohio State was a 7-point favorite, and I said Michigan, cannot get blitzed out of this game in the first 15 minutes or the first 30 minutes for that matter. They have to stay in the game, and as you said, if this game gets in the fourth quarter, with it being close, there might be some puckering on the Ohio State sideline because here we go again. And you go back to the 90s, and that's what happened, especially in 96, right? I mean, Ohio State was a 17.5-point favorite coming into that game on the heels of them going into the 95 game being maybe a touchdown favorite, maybe a 10-point favorite. Biaka Batuka runs for 313 yards. On 37 carries, and Michigan upsets Ohio State 31-23. The next year, Ohio State's undefeated. They're 10-0. They've already won the Big Ten. They're a 17.5-point favorite. Michigan is 7-3, is underachieved. And it was 9-0 at halftime. Ohio State couldn't get the ball in the end zone. Michigan comes out. The second play of the second half, Ty Streets goes 69 yards. Sean Springs falls. It's a 9-7 game, and the puckering began because it's right. Like we were supposed to run these guys out of the building, and here we go again. We're in a dogfight with these guys, and Ohio State didn't score a point in the second half.
Yeah.
So I think those are the 3 keys: control the line of scrimmage, get some turnovers, stay in the game.
I think that's right, and I think that third one is realistic only because Ohio State has struggled. They've come out sleepy in a lot of their games. Now, I don't know, you can't say that'll happen again, but for whatever reason, whether it's playing, quote, down to the competition, they don't have it. And then whether there's adjustments or they say, hey, you know what, we better wake up here and play. I don't think that works on Saturday. You can't afford to, have it be down 7-0 at halftime to Michigan or have it really be close. I think you need to be up probably 10 points or more. And I'm not sure that's going to happen, but we'll see. I do think Ohio State wins. I've got a 2-score game, I believe. And I'm tired of saying this because I've said it the last few years. Well, Ohio State has more talent, which I don't think is actually accurate last season. But that's sort of because they have these flashy skill guys, you tend to think, well, Ohio State has more talent. Well, you don't look at the lines. Like, the offensive and defensive line, that's talent too. It's a different kind of talent. So I think that Ohio State is more explosive. I think they have more to lose for sure. That's the one thing Michigan has going for it is they can play, loosey-goosey because there's absolutely like no pressure on the coaching staff really or on the players and the coaching staff for Ohio State, specifically Ryan Day. He cannot lose this game. I think if he loses this game, I don't think they fire him. But it depends. If he loses to Michigan and then loses in the first round of the playoff, because if they lose to Michigan, they're still in. Pretty certainly still in. But if you lose and then lose again, who knows what can happen. You don't want to be Ryan Day in that situation. So I think they've got a lot to play for. I do think this is a close team. And what I loved about Michigan last year, and really the last 3 years, a lot of chemistry. Seemed like those guys really just came, they got together, they bonded. It was a very close chemistry team. They were winners. They had, I always say the it factor. I think Michigan had the it factor at last year and the previous years. So I think, I don't know if Ohio State has that. I would say this is not even one of the top five Ohio State teams of the last 20 years, even though they're highly ranked. I think it's sort of a down year in college football in terms of there's no real dynasty team. And so, but I think that helps Ohio State this year if they, depending on how far they can go. So we're up against, we've got about, a few minutes left here. Any other thoughts on what needs to happen? Again, I think there is an undercurrent of puckering in Buckeye Nation, even though the bravado is, we're not worried about this game. Well, after you've lost 3 in a row, you're always worried. And Moore said something the other day, and it resonated. He said, they always say we can't pass and throw the ball, and then we throw the ball. And I wouldn't be shocked. I've been saying all along that I think Michigan plays its best game. They will rise to the occasion. Whether it's enough, I don't know, and I don't think so. But I think the game plan, Sherrone Moore really outcoached Ohio State last year and maybe the last couple of years, but really was impressed with his play calling, the creativity on offense. And so we know he can do that. It's just he hasn't had the horses to do it. But if things come together and that 50-6 win over Northwestern is not an aberration, then I'm looking for a good game. I don't like blowouts. I like to see a good game, so I'm not saying that I think it'll be close, but it wouldn't bother me if it's close.
Yeah, I think going back to the defensive line and controlling the line of scrimmage, if Michigan cannot get pressure on Will Howard with a 4-man line or at the 5-man, he's going to pick Michigan apart with the playmakers that he.
I think you're right.
So if they will have to get pressure on him to have any chance whatsoever, because otherwise, the Emeka Ibukas and the Jeremiah Smiths are just going to pick them apart. So.
I think that's fair. I think that may be the key to the game. Michigan has, with that front, they have to get pressure. They have to do more than just stop the run. Yeah. They have to get pressure on Will Howard.
And I know that Ohio State center got hurt, but the guy who's playing now played last year, right? So it couldn't be that big of a downgrade, right? I mean, he was the starter last year. So
yeah. So I think that's been overplayed a little bit. The line, when Josh Simmons went down, a lot of us said, well, there goes the national title, because he was projected to be their top draft pick, which he made a remarkable improvement from a year ago or 2 years ago when he came over from San Diego State. But when he went down, it felt like it was over. And then they made some adjustments, and it's like, are they good enough to beat a Georgia? Are they good enough to beat a Texas? To be determined. But they got a better chance now than what we thought a couple weeks ago, even. So, all right. Well, fantastic. You will be at the game?
I don't think I'm going. It looks cold, and if
okay, all right.
And, here's the deal. I don't think Michigan. I think Michigan loses this game probably 24-7 or 27-7. I think it's maybe a 14-7 game at halftime, but at the end of the day, Ohio State pulls away. I got wrestling practice in the morning, so it's always a hassle to try to get down there. It's going to be cold. If Ohio State wins big, it won't be enjoyable. If Ohio State loses, it won't be enjoyable, because I think the fans will not take that well.
No.
Because they think that this game is in hand and they are going to steamroll Michigan. So I think I'm going to watch this one from my couch. I don't miss a lot of these, but I think that's the route I'm going. We'll see.
Okay. Well, thanks for the time. We'll do it again next year. Always informative, always a pleasure. A fellow walk-on varsity athlete like myself, and good luck to the Wolverines.
Thank you. Glenn Davis, Jesse Owens, Butch Reynolds, and Rob Oller, the Mount Rushmore of Ohio State track and field.
All right, brother. Thank you.
Thanks. Go Blue.
Be sure and subscribe to the Buckeye Extra podcast in the iTunes Store, the Google Play Store, or on Stitcher.